about 11:30 now, about 6 miles. I just lost him. Tally ho, 12 o'clock. Keep going straight. I don't see him. Carefully, Colt. If you get 12 o'clock down, it's really going to stop to the left. Take time, go forward straight. Okay, baby. Forward straight now. Okay, I got it. There's your settling time. Oh, return to shoot it, Oswald. Shoot it for him. You're clear to fire.
Hello and welcome back to the Scale Modelling Cafe, and welcome to what I think is the most exciting part of any project, and that is the painting. So there you've just seen me lay down some silver which is going to aid the chipping later on, and now the first colour to go down is the underside, which in this example I used the MRP colour for the underside, and you can see it's a very warm, very light grey, and you can see that in contrast with the whites of the wheelbase. Now I didn't mask the wheelbase off, I didn't think I needed to, and if there's any overspray that'll be fixed later on. MRP is it's a good paint. It's quite dense, quite opaque, but very thin, so it does take a few coats to build up. And here I am just touching a few little detail areas in around the wheel well there. That's with MRP white, just going back in over the top. And there's the underside base coat done. So if you can zoom in, I've lightened the colour for a little patchy warm finish. It all gets blended in later with the weathering. Now for the top side, and these paints are used mainly GSI Crayolas or guns, but I did use the MRP equivalent over the top because it is slightly different tone, just to break things up a bit. First colour to go down is the tan colour. Now the whole scheme is going to be done freehand. There's going to be no masks here at all, and the way I normally attack this is, as you can see there, I'll just sort of spray freehand roughly the sort of boundary, and then just go back in and just fill it all in. Light even coats, just a nice solid opaque layer. I'm not a fan of pre-shading. I don't think it's particularly authentic. I don't think it's particularly easy technique, because, you know, one or two passes too many, and all that work has all gone. I think it's much easier and you get a much more authentic finish if you just do post shading. So tackling, it's quite a big model, so tackling the model in sections. And there's some of the mottling with some of the MRP colour and some of the lightened base coat. It might look a little bit extreme here, so this is the darker tone going in. It might look a little bit extreme here, however, bearing in mind we're going to have filters, oil weathering, varnishes, and all those layers will tone it down. So I tend to over-exaggerate the fading and shading, etc. on the initial base coat pass, because I know it's all going to get blended in. Okay, now for the FS blah 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 whatever it is. I should have done a bit of research, but it's easy enough to find. And going in here again, this is the guns paint. Now my spray ratios, I have no idea what they are. I put some Mr. Hobby thinner in the colour cup, and then I add a bit of paint, I mix it up, and then I test it, and then I'll just test and adjust there's sort of three elements to it really: the thinner, the paint, and the air pressure. And I've got a little Mac valve on the bottom of my Iwata airbrush, so that's really handy. I don't have to mess about with the compressor itself until I've got exactly the right spray pattern and consistency that I need. So to do the freehand demarcation, I take the end cap off the airbrush, be very careful of the needle, and then I just very carefully just draw it in. And you can see if you do that, this is a 0.2 needle, you can get a really, really tight demarcation. And actually you could probably get away with that in 70-second even. Once the edge is done, then as I said, I just go in and fill it in. Now I tend to have it slightly on the thinner side when I'm doing freehand camo. It just reduces the risk of any sort of splattering and overspray. And you just got to be careful. If the pressure is too high, then if you just stop the airbrush, then as the paint comes out, it tends to the thinner tends to dissolve the paint, which is obviously quite bad. So you really have to keep that airbrush moving, as you can see what I'm doing here. And there's the tail bit finished with the light green. Okay, now for the dark green. So you'll be able to see in a little bit more detail the technique for doing the demarcation. So I do a sort of rough outline and then I just refine it, and you can see how tight that spray pattern is. And then what I'll do is I'll just thicken up that line on the sort of on the unpainted side, if you like. So that's nice and thick, and now I can go in and I can just increase the spray pattern and start filling in. This little area here, it's the main of it is done, and then I'll just extend the dark green out like that. And then it's just a question of working your way around the model. Now I did go back in and tweak the camouflage pattern in places. Initially I used the instructions for the demarcations and the camouflage pattern, but I did a little bit of research, and the aeroplane I ended up depicting had a slightly different pattern, so I ended up having to go in and test and adjust. That's obviously going to cause a little bit of overspray. I could have masked this off with a bit of white tack or something, but yeah, I didn't bother because the MRP it's extremely good paint. Even the sort of the whites and these light greys are very opaque, and it's fairly straightforward to go in and just touch up the paint. And that's it. That's the base coat complete. So it had a very light coat of GSI GX 100 gloss varnish, and then it was time for the decals. So these are the kit decals for the stencils and the national markings. I'm using the ammo system of setting solutions. Sorry for the grey hairs in the way. So the decal's just placed in roughly the right area, and then I just use the end of the tweezers just to manoeuvre it into exactly the right place. Once I've got it right, I'll get a little bit of the old kitchen paper, kitchen towel, and just dab away the excess. And what I'm also doing is putting a fair amount of pressure actually, just to try and press it into the detail. Sometimes I'll use a cotton bud for this as well, but this time it was just the kitchen towel. And then using the tip of the very sharp tweezers, I'll just run those through the recessed detail and push that decal down into position. Here's the cotton bud just going in, just burnishing it again down just to help. And then once I'm happy, I'll get some of the microsole, not microsole, the sole from Ammo, and then I'll just brush that on. And the Ammo products are really very, very good. There we go. And you can see it's gone in quite nicely, and it will just suck down into the details. Once that was done, I went round and I painted the nose cone. This is a mix of red, brown and black, just to warm up the tone a little bit. I didn't want pure black. These are Tamiya paints. And you can see there I've used some of the Ammo purple tape, which is really ultra low tack. And that's going to dry back to a nice sheen actually, not too matte. It is matte, but not too matte. Okay. A real feature of any F4 model is the back end and the metalwork. And as you can see, I'm not taking any chances with any overspray. Kitchen foil is brilliant for this. It conforms to all the curves and everything. And yeah, it's fabulous stuff. So MRP gloss black goes down first. And then it's in with the it'll be in with the Ammo A-stand paints. So this was a tricky masking job actually, because it's not just the inner sections on the tail planes, it's the leading edge and also the wingtip. So it took quite a while to mask it actually. So you can see how I'm getting the gloss, putting down an initial coat and then a slightly wetter coat over the top, and that helps to settle everything down. There's no thinner or anything, that's just MRP straight from the bottle. Now for the metallic areas, various tones were used. Steel, stainless steel were the main two. A little bit of duralumin in as well, just to pick out one or two lightened panels. But using the Alclad, fairly low pressure, fairly light coats, and we're just building it up. So I think these bits are just steel, and then I used stainless steel for the sort of bits behind the exhausts. And there we go. You could just see how that metallic patina just reflects in the light. I didn't use any varnishes or anything there. And then just going back with lots of different tones here. So some burnt metal, some jet exhaust, some burnt iron. Just going in just to darken those areas behind the exhausts. And then eventually it did get a little bit of post shading. But you can see the different tone there. with the panel in the middle, just where it reflects, and a little bit of post shading over the top. Now for the resin exhausts, and these are just beautifully moulded. So treated in the same way as the back end, and then I just went in with some of the hot colours from A-Stand, Ammo's A-Stand range. So this is the blue going on. And it's just a question of just going backwards and forwards until you get exactly the right tone and patina. Now for a little bit of dry brushing. So these are the Ammo dry brush paints. This is gunmetal, and then afterwards a little bit of the lighter colour, the aluminium, just to pick out that detail. So that's it. With all the masking removed, it was out with the oil paints. The main oil paint of choice here was the I just actually mixed up a bit of a concoction based on Ammo's Starship Filth colour, and that was worked into on the underside, and then it was a slightly darker tone and then a slightly warmer browner tone over the tan, and that was worked into all the detail. And then it's just a question of going around with the cloth and gently buffing it away. Very gentle, not too hard, because if you press too hard, you're just going to wipe it out of all the joints. And it's a good idea to leave it for, you know, at least half an hour. I mean, it's going to take days to dry, but I wait at least half an hour, and I do hit it with a hairdryer as well, just to speed things up a bit. Cotton buds are always useful for getting into those nooks and crannies. So it's a very smooth surface, so it's very easy to remove. And then all around the intakes, that was all a little bit tight to get in there, but the cotton bud did the job. And there we go. See, very subtle, but it does make a big difference. Right, now everything was sealed in with a satin varnish. This is the varnish from VMS. It's absolutely wonderful stuff. And I just spray it neat. Very high air pressure, because it is quite gloopy. And I just blast it through the airbrush in a fairly wet coat, and then we just leave it to go off. You can see there I've masked off the nose and the metallic areas. Now for the chipping. So you would have seen right at the very start I sprayed on silver. I was going to do a bit of a hairspray job on it, but in hindsight I decided not to, and I just left it be, because the chips are incredibly fine when you look at the reference photos. So I got a silver pencil, and just using a tapping motion I just built up that sort of typical Vietnam Phantom paint chipping. They're almost like little scratches rather than chips. Not forgetting around the refueling door as well. Obviously that's going to get a bit of a bashing. And the trick as well is to use is to keep the point sharp. So I used regular sharpenings, and then all that was sealed in with another thin coat of VMS varnish, because otherwise if you don't, you're just going to rub it away. So you need to seal it in. Now for the oil brushes now, and this is where we're going to really go to town with the weathering and add all that grime. When you look at photos of the real thing, these things really got filthy. Very unforgiving environment, as you can imagine, in the tropics. So concentrating where the grime's going to build up. So on that hinge for the wing fold, where it's likely you're going to get sort of little gaps, a little bit of seepage down on the flaps and ailerons as well. And then we're just going to blend all that in with a slightly damp brush and just manipulate the oil paint as we go along. So I guess you could call this a kind of wet blending method, just with a bit of thinner. Not too much though. Too much thinner and you're just going to wash it away. Not enough thinner and effectively you're going to get quite an opaque filter. So you've just got to get it just right, really. And you can see they're concentrating around the sort of center of the belly, around the the pylon where the fuel tank would go, and definitely around some of the vents and things. So it's not an even all over effect. It's definitely looking at reference photos, seeing where it got really grimy in real life, and then just trying to replicate that. Another reason why I'm not a fan of pre-shading is people tend to do pre-shading over every single rivet line and panel line. It will vary across the airframe. Obviously there's areas that are more susceptible to oil leaks and things, like underneath the engines, in the middle of the belly here, behind air vents and that kind of thing, as I mentioned before. And if you're going to do that pre-shading method, just be very careful it's not too even across the whole airframe. Okay, now for the streaking. If you look at any picture of any Phantom, you can see the underside's absolutely minging. So using some neat oil brush of paint here, I'm just streaking it on. I use various different tones. I use the ubiquitous Starship Filth, but also some dark mud, which is obviously not trying to simulate mud. It actually, once you streak it, it's quite a nice sort of hydraulic stain kind of tone. That sort of reddy browny colour. Here's that dark mud going down. And I also use a little bit of black as well. You can just see the cocktail sticks that I've wedged into the sparrow bays there. That just means I can put the model down and just protect all the paintwork and the weathering and everything without smudging it. So I'm always appraising what I'm doing. I'm going back in, I'm adding little bits here and there. And if it's too much, we can just take it off with a bit of thinner. Now for the streaking. So this is a damp brush, and again, it's just slightly damp, and just doing this sort of streaking motion just to blend it all in. And that's the final effect. Very authentic, I hope you'll agree. Now clearly these aeroplanes are operating in hot climates, very humid climates, being baked by the sun, being soaked by monsoon rains and everything, and that's going to clearly have a detrimental effect on the paintwork. So to simulate that in with some oil dot weathering, fairly subtle on this one, I have to say. I could have gone a lot more overboard, but this is adding to that base coat as well. Now that has been blended by the varnish layers, so we have lost some of it, but this is kind of acting as a bit of a filter here. You can see I've darker tones in the wing roots, things like that, simulating grime and a bit of shadow. And then to add on to the top of that, we're going to do some pre-shading. So again, with a very dark sort of brown tone, we're just going to go in and relatively low air pressure and just go over the top of some of these panel lines and just building up that grime effect. And on the intakes as well, you can see there. Right, all of a sudden some markings on the tail have appeared. I didn't have the markings when I started painting, so they were done towards the end of the project. Now some chipping on the canopy seals. Obviously these are going to get worn quite considerably, so I mixed up using ammo paints, a bit of yellow and a tiny dot of black to make that zinc chromate colour, and then over the top of that I used a bit of ammo steel, and just using the sponge you get that nice sort of chipped worn effect where you can see some of that primer. And that's it for this episode. So thanks very much for watching, and next time I'm going to finish off the project. So I'm going to glue some bits and pieces, dangly things on. Sort out all the weapons. And put the seats in. And bring everything together. And we finish off the project. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you on the final part next time. Cheers, bye bye.